The silence in the Sterling's dining room was a specific kind of quiet. It wasn't peaceful. It was the heavy, polished silence of immense wealth, a quiet that demanded performance. It lived in the space between the clink of Christophe silver against Berner Dodd porcelain, and the faint, citrusy scent of the floral centerpiece that was larger than a small child. Alara knew this silence well. Her job was to move through it without a ripple, a ghost in a crisp, gray uniform. Tonight, the silence was thicker than usual. Mr. James Sterling was hosting 4 other couples, men with identical, expensive watches and wives with surgically perfected smiles. He sat at the head of the mahogany expanse, a king in his court, narrating a recent corporate conquest. His voice was the only sound permitted to fill the space, a low, confident rumble that expected and received complete reverence. Alara moved along the perimeter of the room, her rubber-soled shoes making no sound on the marble floor. Her task was simple: clear the appetizer plates. She kept her eyes down, her focus on the delicate dance of retrieval, a slight bow, a murmur of "excuse me," a swift, clean removal. It was a choreography she had perfected over 2 years in this house. Then, a small disruption, a tiny plea from the opposite end of the table. "Daddy." It was Leo, one of the 7-year-old twins. He and his sister Lily were permitted to join dinner parties for the first course only, a performative gesture of family for the guests. Lily was silent as always, her eyes wide as she pushed a piece of quail egg around her plate. But Leo was frowning at the menu, a thick card of ivory stock embossed with gold leaf. He was a bright boy, but letters sometimes danced away from him, rearranging themselves into a code he couldn't crack. Mr. Sterling's narrative was interrupted. He paused, his annoyance a flicker in his steel blue eyes. "What is it, Leo?" This word," the boy mumbled, his cheeks flushing red under the chandelier's glare. He pointed a small finger at the paper. The soup," Mr. Sterling sighed, a sound of profound parental burden. "It's consommé, son, we've been over this. Try to keep up." But Leo wasn't looking at his father. His eyes, wide and searching, had found Alara. She was standing near the sideboard, her hands poised to lift a tray. It was a look she knew intimately, the one he gave her in the quiet afternoons in the playroom when they worked with her secret handmade flashcards. It was a look of trust. "You know," his eyes said, "help me." Her heart went out to him. It was a reflex, the teacher in her overriding the maid. She couldn't speak, not here, but she could offer a crumb of encouragement. She gave him the slightest of nods, a microscopic movement, and shaped her lips around the sound of the word, a silent echo of his father's pronouncement. "Consommé." She saw the moment the shape registered in his mind, the small spark of understanding. He took a breath, ready to try again, to please his father. It was a transaction that lasted no more than 2 seconds. It was invisible to nearly everyone, but not to James Sterling. He saw it all. His eyes, which had been on his son, narrowed as they darted to Alara. He watched the silent communication, the transfer of knowledge from the help to his heir, and his face hardened into a mask of cold fury. He saw a line being crossed. He saw a challenge to his authority in his own home in front of his guests. He placed his fork and knife down on his plate with a sharp, definitive click that cut through the room. The conversation at the table died instantly. Every eye turned to him. Alara felt the shift. The air grew thin, charged with an imminent explosion. She kept her posture straight, her hands steady on the silver tray, but a cold dread began to creep up her spine. Mr. Sterling didn't look at his son. He fixed his gaze directly on Alara, who stood frozen 20 feet away. He leaned forward slightly, his voice low but carrying the unmistakable crackle of command. "Alara," she met his gaze. "Yes, sir." He gestured dismissively toward the table with his chin, his expression one of utter contempt. His next words were not shouted. They were worse. They were delivered with a calm, surgical precision, designed to slice her down to her designated role, to remind everyone in the room of her place. "You are here to clear the plates," he said, his voice echoing in the sudden, vast silence. "Not to fill their heads." The words landed like stones in the quiet room. A few of the guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One of the men coughed. A woman smirked into her wine glass. The humiliation was absolute, a spotlight pinning her to the floor. She could feel the heat on her cheeks, a furious blush of shame and anger. Her training, her education, her very identity, all of it was erased in that single sentence. She was a pair of hands, nothing more. Would you endure this? To be rendered invisible and voiceless, your worth defined by the very man whose child seeks your help when he offers none. She held his gaze for a heartbeat longer than was subserviently appropriate. In that moment, she didn't see a powerful executive. She saw a small, insecure man terrified that the maid might be better at connecting with his son than he was. Then the mask of professional deference slipped back into place. She gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Yes, sir." Without another word, she turned and moved to the table, her steps even and unhurried. She began to clear the remaining plates, her hands betraying no tremor. She worked her way around the polished mahogany, gathering the evidence of the meal, her expression a perfect, unreadable calm. She was a ghost again, moving through the silence. But this time, the silence was different. It was filled with the lingering echo of his cruelty and the quiet, unyielding strength of her own dignity. The day after the dinner party, the air in the Sterling house had a new, brittle chill. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, but it offered no warmth. At precisely 9 o'clock, Mr. Sterling summoned Alara to his study, a room of dark wood, leather, and the scent of money. He didn't ask her to sit. "I want to be perfectly clear," he began, his fingers steepled on his vast, empty desk. "Your duties are outlined in the staff manual you were given upon employment. They include housekeeping, laundry, and serving. They do not, under any circumstances, include meddling in the affairs of my children's education. That is handled by professionals whom I pay a great deal of money to do their jobs. From now on, your interactions with the children will be limited to what is functionally necessary. You are not their friend, you are not their teacher, you are staff. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir," Alara said, her voice even. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. "If that happened to you, what would you do?" Later that afternoon, during the twins' designated free play hour, Alara was quietly dusting the shelves in the playroom. Leo and Lily were there, supervised by a nanny who was scrolling through her phone. The children weren't playing. They were sitting under a table, a fortress against the world. Leo saw her and his face lit up. He scrambled out and ran to a small, hidden cubby behind a plush armchair. He pulled out a worn shoebox. Inside were Alara's flashcards. They were nothing fancy, just simple index cards she had laminated herself. On each one she had drawn a vibrant picture, an apple, a boat, a cat, and below it the word written in large, clear letters. For Leo, who struggled with letter recognition, she had made the letters out of textured materials he could trace with his finger, sandpaper for S, felt for F, bumpy glue for B. It was a system born of observation, patience, and care. "The lion one," Lily whispered, crawling out to join them. It was her favorite. Alara's gaze darted to the nanny, still oblivious. Her mind screamed Mr. Sterling's warning, but the pleading in the children's eyes was too strong. She knelt, pulling out the card, a magnificent lion with a yarn mane. She let Lily trace the fuzzy mane before her tiny finger moved to the letters below. Just then, Mrs. Sterling appeared in the doorway, holding a tablet. She watched the scene for a moment, her expression unreadable. "It's just wonderful how you have such a simple way with them," she said. The compliment was coated in a thin veneer of condescension. It wasn't an observation of skill, it was a classification of it. Simple. Unthreatening. The kind of folk wisdom one expected from the help. "Just be careful not to confuse them, Alara. Their real tutors have a very structured curriculum." The message was clear, a velvet-gloved echo of her husband's iron-fisted decree. Alara slid the lion card back into the box. The warmth of the moment was gone, replaced by the familiar chill. She was a guest in this family's life, and her visa was conditional. 3 days later, the world tilted on its axis. Mr. Sterling was in a controlled rage, searching for a misplaced zoning document he needed for an urgent call. He tore through his office, then began storming through the rest of the house, his fury a palpable force. "Has anyone seen the Northgate folder?" he bellowed to no one in particular. His search led him to the playroom. It was empty, the children outside with the nanny. Alara was in the adjacent laundry room, folding towels, the rhythmic snap of linen a small anchor in the tense household. Sterling, muttering to himself, began pulling books off shelves, convinced a child might have misplaced his precious file. Behind a row of oversized picture books, his fingers brushed against a cardboard box, the shoebox. He pulled it out, annoyed. He lifted the lid, expecting crayons or mismatched blocks. He froze. He stared at the neatly organized handmade flashcards. He picked one up, the sandpaper S next to a smiling sun. He picked up another, the felt F under a cartoon fish. He saw the care, the ingenuity, the sheer time it must have taken, and he did not see an act of kindness. He saw a calculated, systemic act of defiance. He saw a maid who, after being explicitly warned, had continued to build a secret world with his children, a world where she was the expert and he was not. It was a mutiny. He didn't say a word. He simply put the lid back on the box, tucked it under his arm, and walked out. That evening, as Alara was preparing to leave, he was waiting for her by the service entrance. He stood there, silhouetted against the fading light, the shoebox in his hand. "What is this?" he asked. His voice was dangerously quiet. Alara's blood ran cold. "They're just learning aids, sir, to help them." "To help them," he repeated, the words dripping with sarcasm. "Or to help you, to make yourself indispensable, to overstep the very clear boundaries I set for you." He opened the box and tipped it over. The cards scattered across the polished floor at her feet, a colorful mosaic of her transgression. The lion with the yarn mane landed face up. "I warned you, Alara," he said, his voice hardening. "I told you what your role was in this house." "My role was to care for your home," she said, her own voice trembling but firm. "And they are the heart of this home. I was only trying to help." "Your help is not required. Your services are no longer required," he said, the words as final as a guillotine. "Collect your things. You are dismissed, effective immediately." He turned and walked away, leaving her standing there amidst the ruins of her work. The back door clicked shut. She was locked out not just from the house, but from the two small lives that had become her own. There was no severance, no letter of reference, no dignity. Just the scattered, colorful cards on the cold, hard floor. The incident was over. She could not go back. A week without Alara felt like a year. The Sterling house, always pristine, now seemed sterile, soulless. The silence she had once navigated was now a hollow, echoing void. To fill it, Mr. Sterling did what he always did. He threw money at the problem. He hired Mr. Alastair Finch. Mr. Finch came with a PhD in early childhood development from a university that sounded important, a leather briefcase, and an hourly rate that could fund a small charity. He was, on paper, the perfect solution. In practice, he was a disaster. His method was rigid, clinical. He sat the twins at the playroom table, now referred to as the learning station, and drilled them with store-bought glossy flashcards. There were no textures, no games, no yarn mains. "L," he would say, holding up a card. Lion. "Repeat, Leo." Leo would stare at the generic clip art lion, his face a thunderous mask of refusal. He'd kick the leg of the table. "That's not the right lion," Mr. Finch would sigh. "It is a lion. All lions are the correct lion. Now focus." The memory of Alara's competence was a ghost that haunted the room. A flashback, sharp and painful, would play in Mrs. Sterling's mind as she watched the daily struggle from the doorway. She remembered peeking in weeks ago to see Alara on the floor with them. "Okay, Leo, the lion is going on an adventure," Alara had said, her voice full of theatrical mystery. "But he can only cross the river if you can build the bridge." She had laid out the textured letter cards, Lion. Trace the path, build the bridge." And Leo, giggling, had traced the sandpaper and felt letters with his finger, sounding them out as he went. He wasn't memorizing, he was playing. He was learning. Now, under Mr. Finch's joyless tutelage, the twins were not learning. They were shutting down. The new tutor's excellence on paper only highlighted the profound, quiet effectiveness of the woman they had cast out. Her skill was visible only in the gaping hole she had left behind. The fallout was not confined to the playroom. The emotional architecture of the children's lives, which Alara had been quietly reinforcing, began to crumble. "Leo," His frustration, given no creative outlet, became prone to explosive tantrums. A trip to a high-end toy store ended in him screaming on the floor, not because he wanted a toy, but because a display of animal figures reminded him of the flashcards. But the most heartbreaking change was in Lily. Alara had been her bridge to the world. With Alara, Lily had started to string sentences together, her soft voice a tentative melody in the silent house. Now the music was gone. At school, she retreated into herself, a ghost in a playground full of laughing children. She communicated only in nods and shakes of the head. One night, Mrs. Sterling went to tuck her in. The room was dark except for a small nightlight. Lily was a lump under the duvet, pretending to be asleep. Mrs. Sterling sat on the edge of the bed and stroked her daughter's hair. She felt something hard and crinkly under the pillow. Gently, she pulled it out. It was a single, crumpled flashcard, worn from being clutched in a small, anxious hand. The lion with the yarn mane. Lily's eyes flew open, terrified that she would lose this last piece of Alara. "Mine," she whispered, her voice raspy from disuse. She snatched it back and held it to her chest, a sacred totem. Mrs. Sterling felt a pang in her chest so sharp it took her breath away. It wasn't just a card. It was a symbol of a bond her money couldn't buy and her husband's pride had destroyed. The child wasn't just missing a maid. She was grieving a friend. If you were there, would you step closer or stay silent? Mrs. Sterling stayed silent, a prisoner in the beautiful, cold house her husband had built. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning. It was Miss Albright, the twins' second-grade teacher. Her voice was gentle but firm, laced with a concern that could not be dismissed. "Mr. Sterling, I'm calling because I've become quite worried about Leo and Lily," she began. "There's been a rather dramatic shift in their behavior and academic engagement over the past 2 weeks." James Sterling leaned back in his leather office chair, the city skyline behind him. He listened, his jaw tightening as Miss Albright detailed the regression. Leo's disruptive outbursts in class, his refusal to even try reading. Lily's complete verbal withdrawal, her disengagement from her friends. "Lily was making such wonderful progress," Miss Albright said carefully. "She was gaining confidence. Now it's like she's disappeared into a shell. Leo is acting out of frustration. It's my professional opinion that something has changed for them at home, a significant emotional event. Perhaps." Mr. Sterling was trapped. His entire life was built on the premise that he was in control, that his decisions were unimpeachable. To admit that firing the maid had caused this much damage would be to admit a catastrophic failure of judgment. It was impossible. His pride, the very engine of his success, was now the bars of his cage. "The home environment is perfectly stable, Miss Albright," he said, his voice cold and clipped. "Perhaps the issue is with your teaching methods. I pay a substantial amount for that school's reputation. I expect results, not excuses." "This isn't about excuses, Mr. Sterling. This is about your children," she replied, her tone unruffled. "They seem to be missing a key figure in their support system." They've both mentioned a woman named Alara. The name hung in the air between them. He felt a flash of rage. The maid was still haunting him, her influence reaching beyond the walls of his home. "Alara is no longer in our employ," he said, the statement a brick wall. "I will handle my children's needs. Perhaps you should focus on handling your classroom." He ended the call, his heart pounding. The trap was closing in. He had created a problem that his usual tools, money, authority, and intimidation, could not solve. The system he had built to protect his ego was now cracking under the weight of a simple, undeniable truth. He had made a terrible mistake. The pressure cooker of the Sterling home was reaching its limit. Mr. Finch, the expensive tutor, resigned. "The children are lovely," he said, lying through his teeth in a formal email, "but they require a specialist I am not equipped to be. Their emotional state is prohibitive to learning." That evening, a fragile truce was broken. "James, this isn't working," Mrs. Sterling said, her voice barely a whisper across the vast kitchen island. "The house is miserable. The children are miserable. Maybe we should just call her, apologize." "Absolutely not," Mr. Sterling snapped, his voice cannoning through the room. "We do not reward insubordination. We do not crawl back to the help." She is gone. Find another one. Find 10 more. I don't care what it costs." The door to discussion slammed shut. Meanwhile, Alara was adrift in a sea of her own. She spent her days scrolling through job listings, sending out applications that were met with silence. Without a reference from her most recent high-profile employer, she was a ghost in the system. The shame of the dismissal clung to her like a damp coat. She would sit in her small, neat apartment, the master set of her flashcards, the ones she'd kept for herself, spread out on her coffee table. They were proof of her skill, of a talent that was now being denied. She felt erased, powerless. It would have been easy to fall into despair. But as she looked at the yarn-maned lion, she felt a flicker of defiance. They had taken her job, but they couldn't take her knowledge. They had dismissed her, but they couldn't diminish her worth. She gathered the cards, stacked them neatly, and tied them with a ribbon. It was a quiet vow. She would not be broken. Her work mattered, even if the only person who recognized it right now was herself. What would you sacrifice to stay true? She had sacrificed her security. What she wouldn't sacrifice was her belief in herself. Miss Albright was a woman who trusted her instincts, and her instincts told her that the Sterling situation was at a critical breaking point. Her conversation with Mr. Sterling had been a dead end. He was a fortress of denial. She knew she couldn't tell him the truth. She had to find a way to let him see it for himself. The school's annual parent showcase was in a week. It was a mandatory event where teachers presented on curriculum developments and student life. It was the perfect stage. After some digging through old school registration forms, she found an emergency contact number for Alara. With a deep breath, she dialed. "Alara, this is Susan Albright, Leo and Lily's teacher," she began. Alara's heart seized. "Are they okay?" "They are not," Miss Albright said gently, and proceeded to explain the full extent of their regression, the silence, the tantrums, the deep, aching sadness she saw in their eyes every day. "Alara, I know this is an incredible amount to ask, and please feel free to say no, but I believe you are the key to helping them. I can't get through to their father. He needs to see what they've lost." She explained her idea. "I'm not asking for a confrontation, just your presence. Would you be willing to come to the parent showcase next Thursday evening? Just sit in the back. Let them see you." Alara was terrified. The thought of being in the same room as James Sterling again, of facing that cold, dismissive glare, made her feel physically ill. But then she pictured Lily's silent face and Leo's frustrated tears. Her fear for herself was eclipsed by her love for them. "Yes," Alara said, her voice quiet but resolute. "I'll be there." She wasn't going for revenge or vindication. She was going for two children who needed to know they hadn't been abandoned. She was entering the proving ground. The school auditorium buzzed with the low hum of parental chatter. It was a sea of expensive blazers and understated jewelry. The Sterlings sat in the front row, a perfect portrait of detached power. The twins sat between them, small and still, their eyes fixed on the floor. Alara slipped in through a side door and found a seat in the very last row, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She felt like an intruder, a ghost at the feast. This is where everything could flip. On stage, Miss Albright was giving a presentation on fostering resilient learners. She spoke about the importance of emotional safety in education. She was masterful, never mentioning the Sterlings by name, but her narrative was clearly built around the twins. "When a child loses a key attachment figure," she said, her eyes sweeping the room, "their entire world can shrink. Their voice can vanish. Our job as a community of parents and educators is to ask what is missing." Mr. Sterling shifted in his seat, a muscle twitching in his jaw. He knew this was about him. It was then that Leo, fidgeting restlessly, turned his head. His gaze scanned the back of the auditorium, and for a split second his eyes met Alara's. Recognition dawned. His face, which had been a mask of sullen boredom, broke open with pure, unadulterated joy. "Alara!" He screamed, his voice a cannon blast in the quiet room. He scrambled off his chair, ignoring his father's sharp "Leo, sit down." Lily's head snapped up. She saw Alara, and a choked sob escaped her lips. She followed her brother, running as fast as her little legs could carry her. The entire auditorium turned to watch. Time seemed to slow down. Two small children were sprinting down the center aisle, their arms outstretched, their faces streaked with tears of relief. They crashed into Alara, clinging to her legs, burying their faces in her coat. "You came back," Leo wept into her hip. Then Lily, who had not spoken a full sentence in weeks, looked up at Alara, her eyes shining. She reached into the pocket of her little velvet dress and pulled out the crumpled, beloved flashcard. The lion. She held it up for Alara to see. In a voice that was shaky but miraculously clear, she said, "The lion was sad. I kept him safe for you." She pointed to the letters. R-O-R, roar. A collective gasp went through the room. It was a moment of such raw, powerful truth that no one could deny it. The story Miss Albright had been telling on stage was now playing out in real, heartbreaking life. The parents, the teachers, they all understood. They saw the missing piece, and then a sound started at the back of the room. A single parent began to clap, then another, and another. It wasn't loud or performative. It was a soft, rolling wave of applause, an acknowledgement of love, a validation of a bond that privilege and pride had tried to sever. It was an applause for the children for their courage, and it was for Alara, literal goosebumps when she spoke. James Sterling sat frozen in the front row, his face pale. The applause was not for him. It was for the woman he had fired. He watched his children cling to the maid he had humiliated, and in front of the entire world that he had worked so hard to impress, his carefully constructed authority crumbled into dust. The applause faded, leaving a thick, expectant silence in its wake. The meeting was unofficially over. Parents began to gather their things, their conversations hushed, their eyes stealing glances at the tableau at the back of the room, Alara on her knees, holding the weeping twins, a quiet island in a sea of public revelation. Mrs. Sterling was the first to move. She walked slowly up the aisle, her face a mixture of shame and relief. She knelt beside Alara and wrapped her arms around her children, creating a circle of four. "I'm so sorry, Alara," she whispered, her voice cracking. Then came James Sterling. He walked not like a king, but like a man who had been profoundly shaken. The armor of his arrogance was gone, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. He stopped before Alara and his family. The entire room seemed to be holding its breath. "Alara," he said, his voice thick. I was wrong. What I did, there is no excuse. I apologize." It was a simple, unadorned admission, stripped of all ego. He looked at his children, clinging to her as if she were life itself. "I'm asking you to come back. I will double your salary, triple it, whatever you want." Here it was, the moment of triumph, the chance for revenge. She could name her price, demand a groveling retraction. But looking at the tear-stained faces of Leo and Lily, Alara knew that revenge was a hollow prize. Justice wasn't about payback. It was about rebuilding what was broken. What does real justice look like here? She rose to her feet, helping the children up with her. She looked James Sterling directly in the eye. "I will not come back as your maid, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice calm and clear. "That role no longer exists." He flinched but nodded, accepting the blow. "Then as what?" "I will return as a professional tutor for Leo and Lily," she stated. "With a formal contract, a competitive salary for that role, defined hours, and a clear understanding that my expertise in this area will be respected. My title will be developmental tutor. We will work as a team, you, your wife, Miss Albright, and me, for their sake." It was not a demand for more money. It was a demand for dignity. It was the choice of soft justice, healing over humiliation, restoration over retribution. The stakeholders, Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, simply nodded, their relief and acceptance palpable. Mr. Sterling agreed to her terms without a moment's hesitation. The contract was drawn up by his own lawyers the very next day. But as they sat in his study to sign it, Alara, now seated opposite him at the desk, she knew her personal vindication was not enough. True justice had to prevent the next Alara from being erased. "There's one more thing," she said, pushing the unsigned contract gently back across the desk. "This fixes the problem in your house. But Leo and Lily are not the only children like them in that school, and I am not the only person with a hidden skill who is judged by their uniform." She laid out her vision. She told him about the children in Miss Albright's class who needed extra help but whose parents couldn't afford a Mr. Finch. She told him about the untapped potential in communities that his world never saw. "You have influence, Mr. Sterling. You have resources," she said. "I want you to fund a new initiative at the school. We'll call it the Creative Learning Resource Center. It will be a place run by Miss Albright, open to all students who learn differently. It will be equipped with sensory tools, with textured letters, with everything I used to help your children. It will be a permanent change, a legacy that helps everyone." The specific rule change was clear. A new, funded program would be institutionalized. Mr. Sterling would be the benefactor. Miss Albright would be the director. Alara would be the consulting architect of its curriculum. It was a plan that changed the system, ensuring the lessons learned from his failure would benefit more than just his own family. He looked at her, a long, appraising gaze. He saw not an employee but a visionary. He picked up his pen. "Done," he said. He signed his name to the initiative's founding document before he even signed her employment contract. The change had begun. The path was open. A month later, the Sterling house felt like a different home. The chill was gone, replaced by the sound of children's laughter. The sprawling, formal playroom had been transformed. One wall was now a whiteboard covered in colorful drawings. A cozy reading nook filled a corner, and a low table was home to bins of clay, textured fabrics, and art supplies. It was a room dedicated to curiosity, not just containment. Alara was on a soft rug on the floor with the twins. The complete set of her original flashcards was spread out in a wide arc. They were playing a game, inventing a story about the yarn-maned lion's journey through a jungle of sandpaper letters. Leo was sounding out difficult words with a newfound confidence, and Lily was narrating the story in full, imaginative sentences. The atmosphere was light, respectful, and filled with the quiet hum of productive joy. Alara was not wearing a uniform. She was in comfortable slacks and a soft blue sweater, the clothes of an educator, a professional. James Sterling appeared in the doorway. A month ago, his presence would have sucked the air from the room. Now he simply leaned against the frame, watching. There was no judgment in his eyes, only a quiet sense of wonder. He held a tray with 3 tall glasses of lemonade and a plate of warm chocolate chip cookies. He didn't speak. He just walked in, placed the tray on the low table, and met Alara's eyes. He gave her a small, sincere nod, a gesture of respect, of partnership, of gratitude. Then he left as quietly as he had arrived. In that silent, simple gesture, a universe of healing took place. Alara felt the last vestiges of her humiliation fall away. Her dignity had not just been publicly vindicated, it had been privately, peacefully restored. She had reclaimed her definition of self, and this time, the whole family was learning it with her. The dedication of the Creative Learning Resource Center at the school was a modest affair, held on a sunny afternoon. There were no news cameras, just a small gathering of parents, teachers, and school board members. Mr. Sterling was there, standing with his wife in the crowd, deliberately not seeking the spotlight. The school principal made a few remarks, and then she introduced Miss Albright to say a few words. "This center is a dream come true for our school," Miss Albright began, her voice warm with genuine emotion. "And while we are incredibly grateful for the Sterling family's generous donation, the true genesis of this place comes from the vision and skill of one remarkable educator." She smiled towards Alara, who stood near the front. "This center, and the Lion learning curriculum it uses, was designed by our new educational consultant, Miss Alara Vance. There was no dramatic retelling of the story, no mention of maids or firings. The recognition was focused entirely on Alara's competence. Miss Vance's innovative, sensory-based teaching methods have provided a powerful new way forward for students who see the world a little differently," Miss Albright continued. She reminded us that the most effective learning comes from a place of trust, creativity, and deep respect for the individual child. The success of this program is her success. The applause that followed was warm and genuine. Alara felt a quiet pride settle over her. This was recognition done right. It wasn't about being a savior. It was about being a professional whose work was seen, valued, and now shared. As she looked out at the faces in the crowd, she knew a door had been opened, not just for her, but for others who would come after. A few weeks after the center opened, Alara stopped by to see how things were progressing. She walked into a room buzzing with quiet activity. In one corner, a tutor was helping a young girl who was struggling to differentiate B and D. The tutor reached for a brightly colored box on the shelf. The label read, Lion Learning Cards, a sensory alphabet system. She pulled out 2 cards. Alara watched as the little girl traced a B made of bumpy glue and a D made of smooth, polished wood. A little spark of understanding lit up the child's face. Miss Albright came over and handed Alara a box. "The first production run," she said, beaming. "They're already a huge hit with the kids." Alara opened the box. The cards were beautifully and professionally made, but the designs were hers, faithful to her original hand-drawn pictures. On the top of the stack was the lion, his yarn mane now a sturdy, textured felt. She picked it up, running her thumb over the familiar shape. A wave of emotion washed over her. She remembered holding this very same design in secret, the shame of it being scattered on the floor by Mr. Sterling, the desperate hope Lily had invested in it. Then, it had been a symbol of her transgression, of her overstepping. A piece of contraband. Now it was a tool, a product, a legitimate and celebrated method. It was a symbol of inclusion printed and shared for all. Did the object's meaning change for you too, she thought, a small smile playing on her lips. Its meaning had been transformed, from a whisper of defiance to a clear voice of hope. She was ready for the future. The final scene is 6 months later. The Resource Center is hosting its first parent workshop. At the front of the room, standing beside Miss Albright, is Alara. She is no longer an employee of the Sterlings but a salaried consultant for the entire school district, training other educators on her methods. She is poised, articulate, and confident, guiding a group of engaged parents through a learning exercise. Leo and Lily are at a table in the front, proudly demonstrating how to use the Lion learning cards to build words. They are not props, they are her expert assistants, thriving and bright. In the third row, among the other parents, sits James Sterling. He is not on his phone, not looking at his watch. He has a notebook and a pen, and he is diligently taking notes, a look of focused concentration on his face. He is not the benefactor or the boss. He is just a parent, learning. Alara pauses her presentation and her eyes meet his across the room. He looks up from his notes and gives her a nod of profound respect. She smiles back, a genuine, warm smile of acknowledgement. The room is filled with the quiet hum of learning and collaboration. The roles have been fundamentally and permanently rewritten. The man who once believed she was only there to clear plates now sits in a classroom of her design, eager to learn what she has to teach. There is no applause. None is needed. There is only the quiet, powerful, and lasting impact of a legacy in motion. The room has changed, and in that stillness, in that dignity, there is a universe of justice.